So I would like to welcome you on next episode of Talk Battersea. I have my next guest here, Claire, and with her we're going to be sharing next story of the personal life. Which one, Claire, will tell us? Lovely. I would like to talk.
So I guess we should start at the beginning, and that is sort of where I come from. But so let's go back nearly 40 years. I was born in South Africa in a small town called Kimberley, which is sort of very well known worldwide for its diamonds. And spent most of my childhood growing up in that small town, although I did have a bit of an interlude in Namibia, in Windhoek, for a couple of years, and that little part of my childhood was like something from the movie Out of Africa. The kids used to, we stayed in an expat community, and it was a very small, tight-knit group of people, and at that stage, Windhoek was still really being built up and stuff like that, and so we lived right on the very edge of town, and the kids were allowed free reign over across the community, and we could explore the hills around there and all that sort of stuff. So we used to go hunting baboon spiders and looking for snakes and climbing walls and watching baboons and all of that sort of stuff. So it really was like something out of the movies that tell these stories of Africa. But that was only a couple of years. For the most, I was in Kimberley, where my family has been from Kimberley for generations. So my family's always been really well known there. Quite a small English-speaking community, getting smaller by the day, really, as it becomes even sort of more multicultural in South Africa. But it was a very good sort of childhood. My mom is from England, and that's how I kind of ended up here now, and having left South Africa. But we can get into that like a little bit later if we want to. But yeah, it was a great childhood. We went to school, we cycled to school. The one rule as a kid was always that you had to be home before the street lights came on, which I think is a freedom that a lot of today's kids don't have. Mm-hmm. I think the 90s were a great time to grow up in South Africa. It was the age of democracy, which is, of course, a really fascinating part of South Africa's history. I don't have much experience or memory of the apartheid years. My memories of South Africa have always been of a united nation, like a unified nation. Being in class with kids from all backgrounds and all of that sort of stuff. So I really grew up in post-apartheid South Africa.
I have a question. If you have siblings, or your only child?
I have a brother. He's also in England, actually. Younger brother. He has pretty much the same sort of experience as me, I'm sure, although he played rugby and I stayed as far from the sports field as I possibly could. I was very much the academic and the public speaker, and I was a girl guide for a lot of years, which was an amazing organization, and I still see every now and then around here I see the Girl Guides and the Scouts doing stuff, and I think it's such a great community of young people, worldwide.
What is it exactly?
So I get Girl Guides and Boy Scouts was started by an Englishman called Baden Powell, and it comes out of the Boer War, so also another link between South Africa and England, and he used youngsters to run messages from the front line back to the operations centre and stuff like that, and he called them Scouts. And that progressed after the war to form this little organisation of boys who would get together and go camping and hiking and learn outdoor survival skills like knotting and all that sort of stuff. And then what happened was the girls were jealous that their brothers were getting to do this and they weren't. So he formed a sister organisation called the Girl Guides. Now it's a lot more integrated and stuff like that. I think Boy Scouts are no longer Boy Scouts, they're Scouts, and they can include boys, girls, anything. Mm-hmm. But it is a great global organization of young people, and it's adapted as the times have grown on. So they focus a lot on like leadership skills and community care and all of that sort of stuff. It's really cool. It's well worth looking into if you're looking for an organization to send your kids to after school stuff, and it's great.
So you started developing kind of skills. What your passion are? And things. What was your passions?
It kind of supplements my passion as being good at stuff, or it was when I was a teenager. So I didn't just want to get one badge. I wanted to get all the badges. So I, in those days, they were very different. They focused on things like laundry skills.
Laundry
skills, how to wash your clothes.
Oh, how lovely.
And sewing skills. There was a sewing one and there was a knitter's badge, but then there were also the really cool sort of like orienteering kind of things and map reading and all of that sort of stuff. So I did a lot of very different things.
Okay.
And where I grew up, the girls and the boys in Scouts and Guides were fiercely competitive, and the girls were not just fiercely competitive, we were also mostly the winners, so it was great for my competitive edge. But we used to do phenomenal things. Like, one of my favorite memories from those years is going on what we called the night hike, and that took place every year in spring, so coming out of winter, going into summer. And basically you and your patrol would be dropped off somewhere in the bush, and we're in the veld, as the South Africans would say, and you would be given coordinates to plot a map. You plot your map, you do all that sort of thing, then you'd hand that in, thank God, because if you'd made mistakes, you'd have been really lost. And then you get given the real map and a compass, and you, at sunset, hike off into the bush with your map and your compass and your backpack and that sort of thing, and you have probably around 6 to 7 hours of walking ahead of you from base camp to base camp to base camp. And it was one of the most fun things to do, and I only think I realized as an adult what a privilege it is to be able to walk in nature reserves in South Africa in the dark with a compass and the stars and nothing else.
I've never done this kind of thing.
Oh, it's so much fun. We did things like raft building, and in fact we had to build a raft, float the raft on water, and cook an entire meal on the raft, and then we could come back in.
With an open fire?
With an open fire, yeah.
How many boats did you burn?
Well, we didn't get to the cooking part because a storm opened up, and we all got pulled in off the water anyway, which was probably a good thing because half the rafts hadn't even made it out to the cooking point, let alone serve dinner or anything like that. So we ended up having to make our meals in under shelter, in like a little community hall. So we couldn't use flames, we had to use gas in the end.
What age was this?
I was about 14 or 15 at that stage, so going back mid-90s.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's changed quite a bit now. I don't know what it's like with all sorts of new rules and guidelines and that sort of stuff. So, but we used to just have complete adventures. It was really cool. And I did it all the way through until I was 18 or 19 years old.
Okay, so you've been for a long time part of the group?
For more than 10 years I was part of that, yeah.
So this was the time from 9 until 9 to 19?
Yeah.
So you've been developing this kind of skills, this kind of first love, and this kind
of... lots of love. I was in an all-girls school, and part of the reason we joined Girl Guides was to socialise with the Boy Scouts the boys from the Boy Scouts troop. So there were lots of romances.
How does it work exactly in a girls' school? When did you join? And
so the South African schooling system works very differently to the schooling system here, but you go into high school at age 13 and a half. Mm-hmm. And you go through high school until 18, and that's when you write your leavers certificate, and you, if you pass, you get your matric certificate, which gives you access to university education and stuff. So high school is 5 years long, and that was when I was in an all-girls school, which is a very different experience, I think, from a mixed school where everyone is sort of together. Girls can be pretty bad bullies, and that's something I think that was worse in a girls' school than not. But at the same time, I really flourished in that school. I did really well. Like I said earlier, I'm not a sportsman, but I am very academic. I love learning, I love studying, I love speaking publicly. So I was in the debating society and did a lot of really cool things with that, like represented my province at a national debating competition at that stage. This is also going back many years. But yeah, and then sort of getting to I suppose the pinnacle of my high school was when I was made deputy head girl. I don't know whether those things still happen nowadays. This is going back very many years.
I have totally different school system.
But the South African school system is actually very close in principle to the English system, because that's where it comes from. Like if you look at South Africa's heritage, South Africa's biggest heritage comes from the Dutch and from the English. So the school systems and all that sort of thing were adopted from the British system, adopted and adapted.
So now we got through your childhood. So you've been all the time competitive. You've been always wanted to be the best.
Yeah.
And when you end up this school, let's say high school at the age of 19, what was happening after?
So I left high school and went straight to university.
Same as South Africa?
Still in South Africa, but I moved to a city that was as far away from my hometown as I possibly could get.
That is?
It was called Grahamstown, which is no longer called Grahamstown. It's called Makana. And I went to a university called Rhodes University, which is linked to Cecil John Rhodes, another big British colonialist, big in the mining industry and stuff like that. And mired by controversy in recent years because he wasn't a very nice guy, and but the legacy that he left South Africa when he died, this megalomaniac diamond mining magnate, was education. So he left scholarships and he left universities, he left libraries, he left, I mean, some of those institutions are still being funded by his trusts.
Wow.
So education-wise, he left a lot in South Africa. But I think what is going on in South Africa at the moment, where people are tearing down monuments to him and they're demanding that places named after him are renamed and all that sort of stuff, there's a much bigger story to tell. You know, he wasn't just this charitable millionaire. He was a nasty, nasty man who exploited the non-white people in South Africa quite badly, and history deserves to be known. People need to know that about him, and not just talk about his good points and stuff like that. But that's
another story.
That's a whole other story, and I'm not going to get into it because I'm not an expert. But I went to Rhodes University.
What have you been studying? What was the specialty?
I studied journalism. I was determined. At 16, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I was thinking about a lawyer, and I was thinking about all sorts of other things. And then I kind of stumbled across journalism. I thought I could be quite good at that. Like, I like talking and I like writing, and I'm really good with words and storytelling. So this seems like a natural fit. And I kind of became blinkered after that, and was, by 18, I was like gonna go on and win Pulitzers and Nobel Prizes and all sorts of things. But anyway, I digress. Rhodes University is really well known for its media studies program, but it's also really known for its drinking culture, as most universities are. But Rhodes is particularly well known for its drinking culture. And I spent 4 years at Rhodes.
So you've been drinking and studying at the same time?
Yeah, balancing the two. One of my former teachers, when I left school, she said to me, if you're getting more than 50%, you're working too hard. If you're getting under 50%, you're not working hard enough. So I just aimed for 50%, which was quite hard for an academic who was used to getting 80s and 90s. But I did try at university to kind of do as much as I could on top of studying. So any opportunity that I had, I'd work to get work experience. And I would socialize a lot and stuff like that. And from when I was 18 years old, all the way through, I worked as a news journalist. I was very fortunate in that I had a good connection with the newspaper back home, and they took me on as a student journalist in my first year. So right from like day one of studying, I was able to get my stories printed and my photographs printed and all of that sort of stuff, and I became a bit of a byline chaser. I think, you know, you go into journalism because you're not just good at writing and all that sort of stuff, but you have a little bit of an ego as well, because you're really looking to see your name in print and to get the front page and maybe win an award. But it was a really good experience. I got to do some incredible things, some really scary things, some things that no 18 or 19-year-old should probably have to report on, particularly in South Africa. It's a really tough society. You know, there's hard stories to cover, and I was working at a small newspaper in a relatively large city that had a lot going on, and the bosses of the newspaper never stopped a junior journalist from reporting on these things. So I have horrible cases that I can bring up about kids that have been abused for years by their neighbors and stuff like that, and lots of drug raids and police operations. And one police operation, they were going to raid, or they had found out some information that the train traveling between Bloemfontein and Kimberley, these two cities, sort of halfway along the route, drugs were being chucked out of the window, and someone would drive along later and fetch those bags of drugs. So they wanted to catch the guys that were taking the drugs onto the train. And to do that, they had to get on the train, but not in Bloemfontein, because then they'd just dump the drugs and run. So the idea was that we would sit in a small, disused railway line station along the route between Bloemfontein and Kimberley, and the train would slow down, but not stop. And all of us would run alongside the train and jump onto the moving train, and then go from the back and the front of the train and raid the carriages and the cabins as we went through it, and confiscate drugs. And
okay, I have goosebumps.
It was, we all crouched down in the bushes and we waited, and then the call came that the train was on the way and you had to get ready, and I had my camera bag and my camera, and I was like ready. I was ready to cover the story, but I'm also a complete clumsy fool. Like, so I'm running alongside the train. The guy in front of me hops up easily. I grab hold of the handle, and my feet come out from under me. And now I'm just being dragged behind a moving train. But fortunately, the guy who hopped on before me grabbed me by the backpack, because I had this camera backpack on, and he grabbed me by the backpack and just hauled me onto the train. And I was safe. And the police made some good confiscations that night. They found all sorts, from concealed weapons to tons of marijuana, and some hardcore drugs like crystal meth and stuff like that. So it was really fun.
So the most dangerous.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved the danger. I went on another drug raid. And
how many have you done?
I've been on at least a dozen. But I remember going to the briefing for this drug raid, and they looked at me and they said, "Oh, we don't have any bulletproof vests in your size. You're just going to have to go without one."
Thank
I was
you.
the only person not wearing a bulletproof vest on this raid. And of course, I was like 22, 21, and I was just like invincible, so did it really matter? But I was just like, no one's going to get at me. But being the photographer on these scenes, like on these raids and stuff like that, you can't be in the background. You've got to be really up front and pushing away. So here I am, no protection, bustling my way between these brutishly sized cops who are doing the drug raid and taking down some of the most dangerous drug dealers in that particular area. And I didn't think about safety. Safety was not front of my mind. Getting the story was, getting the picture was. And I became a little bit well known for being, what is the word, for having the appetite for adventure, I suppose. I got sent to a flood.
I think it's also you love danger.
Oh, I do. Not anymore. I've become a little bit more risk averse as I got older, but I got sent to this flood, and they weren't even able to get people into the flood zone in 4x4 vehicles. They were helicoptering food and supplies in, and my editor decides that I can get there in a hatchback 2x4, and off we go. And of course, I was a little nervous that time around, to be perfectly honest, because I didn't know what I was getting myself into, and I didn't know whether this little car could actually get us there. And true as God, the first shitty road that we got to, the car got stuck. And like door deep in sticky, wet mud. And the guy that I was with had dressed in his finest workwear, leather shoes, chinos, open collar shirt. Like, he looked really good, but to go to a flood zone, so anyway. And he refused to get out of the car to get muddy, to help us push it out. So I said, oh, I'll do it, but then you have to do the manipulation to the accelerator and clutch and stuff like that. He didn't have his driver's license, so he didn't know what the difference was between an accelerator and a clutch. And we struggled and we struggled and we struggled, and we just kept digging ourselves deeper in this mud. And by this stage, I had fallen over twice, and I had mud from top to toe. I was encrusted in mud. The rain was coming down. We had no cell phone reception, no mobile reception whatsoever. We were in a proper dead zone. We hadn't seen a car for a good hour and a half. And then this bucky, like a truck, comes along with all these women in the back. And how that car had got along that road, I don't know, but these women had gone to town for supplies, and they were also dressed in their town best, and pretty skirts and tops and dresses and stuff like that. And they looked at me, and we didn't speak each other's language. They were Tswana, I was English. We did not speak each other's language, but somehow they knew what we needed to do. And they all got up and tucked their skirts into their knickers, and got behind me and got behind the car. And there must have been about 8 or 9 of us, and we women pushed this car through sheer force out of the mud.
Wow.
And then we got out and we ululated, we were like, ah! Celebrated the fact, and we went our separate ways. But yeah, so I have lots of stories like that from my days as a junior journalist.
So that was the beginning of your career. So now,
yeah.
As we're talking right now, we can connect it that you really became after university also journalism.
Yeah.
And you've been actively doing that.
Yeah, I worked as a journalist for a few years after university, at a couple of different newspapers and stuff like that. And then I burnt out for the first time.
What age?
I must have been about 24 or 25 at that stage, so still very young. And I think one of the things, again, I don't know what the situation is nowadays, but certainly in those days, no psychological support was offered to journalists, or to paramedics, or to police officers. It was very thin on the ground, and you were seeing some pretty horrendous things. And you, particularly at 24 or 25, however old it was, I wasn't equipped to deal with what I was seeing. So I burnt out, and I decided then and there that maybe I wasn't built to be a news journalist. Maybe I didn't have the hard exterior that I needed. I took everything to heart. I took things home with me, which you should never do as a journalist. You need to divorce yourself from what you're witnessing. And it was then that I moved into sort of the back end of journalism, and I became an editor, and I edited other journalists' work, and copy edited and proofread and that sort of thing, and kind of wove my way through a bit of news in that area, and then ended up working for a travel magazine, which is about as far as you can get from daily news coverage, because it's on the very luxury end of the scale. And that was right at the very end of magazines' heyday, because in South Africa, certainly, magazines aren't doing well anymore. Everything's gone online, media's gone online, particularly travel journalism. But when I was there was still money to be made in the travel journalism industry, and although I worked behind the scenes, I did get to travel a little bit. I went up to the Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe and Zambia, saw them from both sides. That was the article. If you want the best experience of the Vic Falls, go to the Zambian side. That's my opinion. And then after a little while, I just felt like journalism was becoming a really hard industry to be in, and I needed to pivot. But for 10 years, more than 10 years, I had only ever seen myself as a journalist and in the journalism field.
What age was this?
So I'm now, that's probably hitting around 29, 30 years old. So been through my 20s, I've done the adventure and that sort of stuff. The journalism industry is taking one hit after another. And when I started my career in journalism, there was no such thing as Twitter. It did not exist. By the time I ended my career, that is in journalism, that is where stories are being broken. Twitter is, that is where news comes from nowadays. And so I kind of took a bit of a step into other areas of communication and other areas of storytelling. I went and worked on a couple of websites that created travel content for Cape Town. I worked at a website that built travel guides for expats. So all sorts of like back end stuff. And then after being made redundant a couple of times because the travel industry was not doing well in South Africa, I ended up in corporate communications, which is really quite far removed from daily news journalism. And what I ended up doing is writing press releases and building internal communications campaigns and doing social corporate responsibility things. And so all my very first step into corporate, which if you work in corporate, just saying corporate, you'll understand what that's like. It's business suits, it's meetings, it's pivoting, it's
reporting.
Yeah, it's taking it offline. It's all those sorts of things that you hear in all these meetings and stuff like that. And through that, I found that there is another way to tell stories, and that is to sort of tell stories to people who work for a company, which is quite interesting. I'm trying to think of an example, and I can't think of anything offhand. But one of the things that we had to do in my first corporate communications job was we were merging two companies, and the smaller of the two companies was being sort of adopted into the larger company and had to change all its processes and change all its branding and you change all its systems and all that sort of stuff. And it's really hard for people to adapt to that because they get used to doing their job in a certain way, and now they're being told that it has to change. And so part of my job was helping to communicate those changes and to take people along on the journey of change and stuff like that, which is all just sounding like corporate jargon, but really interesting stuff, I thought. And that worked well for a little while, and then I left that job to go back into travel journalism because I thought, let me give it one last shot. Let's see if the industry has righted itself. Turns out it hadn't, because I was made redundant about 10 weeks later. But those 10 weeks were a roller coaster, and they were so much fun. I was working for a startup travel company, and
still in South Africa.
Still in South Africa, still in Cape Town. And it was when I was made redundant from that job that kind of triggered my husband and I to start talking about what next. Mm-hmm. And for a long time...
Oh, so let's say you are married.
Oh yes, I got married in between. met the love of my life, married him. We've been married for nearly 10 years this year. He's been incredibly supportive through all of this. And he's the calming influence to my crazy. But he and I sort of had been talking about leaving South Africa and experiencing another country. Mm-hmm. We've been talking about it for a while, but for us, we were complacent and we were comfortable, so there was nothing really pushing us. And then when I lost this job, I think that was the trigger for us to go, what the hell are we waiting for? Like, we keep talking about this and saying one day in the future we'll do it. Well, why don't we just do it now? We don't have children, we have a dog, we can sell our house. And so we decided that we would take advantage of the fact that I have British citizenship through my mom to try our hands at England. And so we moved to London in 2019. I came across first.
Just 2019?
Yeah.
Just 3 years ago?
It's been 3 years. Yeah, it's been 3 years.
Wow.
So although I feel like this is home now, and South Africa is not home anymore. South Africa is the place that talks to my soul, but this is where my home is. This is where my people are and stuff now. So
I know what you mean.
It's a weird experience, I must say.
So where did you move? What part of London?
So initially moved into Wandsworth, quite close to the prison, and sort of became.
Of course, you've been attracted to danger, so we had to close the prison.
Of course. So, but became quite sort of enchanted with Southwest London as a whole. Really loved it. And kind of looked quite close to that sort of area, Wandsworth Common and that sort of area, when I started looking for flats. And but then I stumbled across a couple in Battersea, and I was like, well, I've heard about Battersea. I know the Battersea Dogs Home is there, so you know that's always great because maybe one day I could volunteer at the dogs. So that's how my brain was going. I was like, oh, Battersea Dogs Home, great. Oh, there's a power station too. Okay, cool. And so I came across and I saw a couple of flats, and the first flat that I saw was the one that I'm in now, which is in sort of Vicarage Crescent, just near the Battersea High Street Square, and fell completely in love. Fell completely in love with the area, fell completely in love with the flat, and I know the rental industry here is so competitive, so I was just hoping and praying that my application was going to be accepted and that we'd get that flat, and as luck would have it, we did. We got the flat and we moved in a couple of months later and really have made this area our home.
Let's before we will talk about Battersea, let's ask, what do you do now?
Oh, what do I do now? Well, I'm 3 weeks into a new job.
Wait, guys, this different timeline.
Yeah. So bouncing around here, but worked for a phenomenal company for the first 2.5 years of being in England, and
so are you started working on the journalism, or now?
So now I'm really quite far out of journalism. I am now working for a consultancy that builds programs for big companies that employ thousands of people, and they build these mostly training and communications programs for these companies that deal with issues of health and safety and sustainability. So vastly different from anything I've ever done before, but quite dynamic, relies quite heavily on communication skills and storytelling, which is where I come in. But very cool. I've only been there for 3 weeks, so early days, but loving it. And still in communications, because I think the thing I've learned over the years and on this really quite weaving journey that my career has taken is that as long as there is some aspect of my career that deals with storytelling and words and communicating, that's where I'm happiest.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So let's ask the kind of last question. Let's go the last 5 minutes. That what do you love about Battersea? Because we are in Talk Battersea.
Yeah, we're on Talk Battersea. What do I love about Battersea apart from the dog's home? I love the people here. I really have found a home here. I feel like Battersea is a small town within a big city, where you walk down the street and you recognize people walking their dogs, and you go into your local coffee shop and they know your order, and you go to Battersea Park and you see people and dogs that you know, and I love that about Battersea, that it has this community feel. I suppose I'm probably a small town girl at heart because that's where I was born and that's where I grew up. So I really am drawn to places that have that sense of unity and oneness and sort of caring for each other and stuff like that. And certainly, like, I'm loath to leave this area. I know everyone says that young people come in, they sort of settle here for a couple of years, and then when they want to sort of leave London, they move out into the suburbs and stuff like that. But I don't think I'm anywhere near that point in my life at the moment. I really do love where we live. It's close enough to the city. I love going on runs down the river path and into Battersea Park, and sort of running along that avenue of trees in Battersea Park, and then sort of going around, and then you run through the cherry tree blossoms, and it's just, I love this area.
So let's find, for example, one favorite outdoor place, one favorite pub, and one favorite, like totally top favorite, your place, any of your choices.
That's so difficult because there's so many. But I'd say favorite outdoor spot has to be the little rose garden area in Battersea Park. You can't take dogs or anything like that. I really like that little space. It's really quite zen and beautiful and really lovely. I don't often get into that spot because I have a dog, so I'm forever walking with my dog rather than without her. But I love that spot. Favorite pub? It's not a pub.
A restaurant.
Restaurant, but I love Bar Aspen. Really new, it's only been around for a couple of months, but it is absolutely phenomenal. They have incredible wines, they have a great cheese platter, and it's got an incredible vibe. And I will say that one of the best music playlists I've ever heard. Like, whenever I go into there, I find myself jamming along to the music. It's incredible. So that's definitely my favorite place to hang out in terms of like a drinking spot.
What is your the favorite place where you're going?
Oh, my favorite place is Suzette's. For so many reasons, I do think that they make one of the best coffees in Battersea.
Oh, thank you.
Without a doubt. I love the people there. I love absolutely every single one of the baristas. They honestly got me through lockdown because Suzette's was open from pretty much day one, and not only could you buy your toilet paper there, but you could buy coffee and you could get a good friendly smile and a bit of conversation. And when you're locked down for weeks on end, I think that is key. And it's also, to me, I feel like it's pretty much at the center of the community here. You know, you pop in and you see the same sort of people coming through there once they've dropped their kids off at school. They all sit and have tea and coffee. And then you have the work from home people come in there and sit and work remotely a little bit, and you can see them sitting there. And then you have the people from over the road, from the church over the road, they come in and they have meetings there and stuff like that. So I do feel like Suzette's is at the heart of this area of Battersea, certainly. And I love it.
Wow. I would end like this. Thank you for coming today and having a conversation with me.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Guys, if you want to know, follow Claire, and I'll tag her on Instagram and on social media. This video is posted on YouTube, as you can see. Give a like, share, give a comment if you have any other questions. I'm sure I'll have with Claire another videos, and thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure. It was great talking to you.
Be one of my first guests to Talk Battersea.
I love talking. I love Talk Battersea.
Thank you.